In some workplaces, some employees are singled out and repeatedly picked on, belittled, threatened, and shouted at or may be physically touched inappropriately and in some cases outright assaulted. These bullying and harassment behaviors can seriously harm and negatively impact the lives and mental health of those who have been targeted, as well as those who witness them. This is particularly the case when they go unaddressed. In this video, we are going to discuss bullying and harassment and their impact on mental health informed by a sex and gender-based analysis. This video is part of a series about the importance of a sex and gender-based analysis approach to mental health in the workplace. The series contains episodes on specific topics with explicit considerations for men, women, and people with diverse gender identities. You might have heard of sex and gender-based analysis, or SGBA, before, but you may want to understand more about what it means in connection with workplace bullying and harassment more specifically. We'll first briefly describe what is workplace bullying and harassment and its relationship to workplace mental health. Then we'll describe why it's important to take an intersectional sex and gender approach to it. We'll look at some examples of people's experiences of workplace bullying and harassment. Next, we'll identify some promising practices that can be used to address bullying and harassment in support of workers' mental health. These practices can help to improve workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll also briefly touch upon what we know of how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted workers' experiences of bullying and harassment, and then we'll get into a specific example. First, a bit of background.
What is workplace bullying and harassment? Bullying and harassment in the workplace can be defined as any inappropriate comments, conduct, or action by a person at work towards a worker that she or he knew or reasonably ought to have known would cause the targeted worker to be intimidated or humiliated. Perpetrators can be an individual or a group and may include clients, other coworkers, managers, or supervisors. Workplace bullying and harassment can be multifaceted. It can start with microaggressions or microincivilities, which on the surface don't seem so bad, such as having your judgment questioned or being talked over in a meeting. But it can escalate to persistent put-downs like, "You're so stupid," and develop further into more overtly problematic behaviors. Perpetrators can also bully their targets through technology, what is called cyberbullying, including on online platforms at work and at home. Targets of bullying may experience feelings of inferiority, invisibility, as well as outright hostility and rejection. Bullying and harassment at work are common problems in Canada. A Statistics Canada survey reported that 19% of women respondents and 13% of men respondents had experienced harassment in their workplace in the past year. The most common type of workplace harassment was verbal abuse, followed by humiliating behavior. In a survey of Canadian public servants, 18% reported being targets of bullying and harassment. Bullying and harassment behaviors may not always be seen by others, but when they do and go unchecked, it creates a toxic workplace.
What is an SGBA lens, and why is it essential to a discussion of bullying and harassment? In brief, sex and gender-based analysis, or SGBA for short, is a tool or a way of thinking about things that helps us to examine sex-based and gender-based differences and similarities, and the consequences for the people involved, some of which are harmful or unjust. It's kind of like a pair of glasses that lets us see things which often go unseen. SGBA allows us to understand that neither sex, which focuses on biology, nor gender, which focuses on the social and cultural, are independent of each other. They are closely intertwined. Sex and gender and other aspects of identity, such as race, ability, cultural identity, and age, also intersect with each other. As Kimberly Crenshaw describes, intersectionality is a prism for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other. Systems of privilege and oppression act on individuals represented by their identities to produce advantage or privilege or disadvantage, such as racism and sexism. For more details, we encourage you to view the standalone episode on sex and gender-based analysis. Mental health and the workplace are both heavily shaped and influenced by sex and gender, as well as by other aspects of identity and intersectionality. Applying SGBA to examine mental health in the workplace is essential for both employees and organizations to support employees' mental health.
Different experiences of bullying and harassment in the workplace. Now, we will look at different experiences of workplace bullying and harassment. Some people are much more likely to be bullied and harassed at work, and are at greater risk for specific types of harassment. But first, a few definitions. Gender-based harassment, for example, targets a person's gender identity or sexual orientation. It serves to reinforce traditional gender norms. Sexual harassment denigrates a person's sexuality. It may consist of sexual jokes and innuendos, and unwanted and repetitive gestures of sexuality, including inappropriate physical touching. It serves to reinforce heteronormativity. In a 2017 study conducted for Employment and Social Development Canada, men were more likely to have experienced harassment than women, but women were more likely to have experienced sexual harassment and to have experienced violence in the workplace. Those who experienced sexual harassment tended to work in environments with a higher ratio of men in positions of power. People with disabilities and members of a visible minority group were more likely to experience harassment than other groups. Indigenous women, for example, are more than twice as likely to report having experienced sexual harassment than non-Indigenous women. It is important, however, to note that these trends may reflect an underreporting of bullying and harassment. Gender-diverse individuals often experience microaggressions, which are targeted at their non-binary gender identity, yet only a third of LGBTQI2S individuals reported harassment or discrimination to their employer, mostly due to fear of retaliation. People with disabilities. The likelihood of reporting workplace harassment was 23% among individuals who had a mobility limitation, 7 percentage points higher than those who did not report a mobility limitation. Disabled persons' perceptions of their organization's inability to address bullying may lead to their reluctance to disclose their disability to their employer for fear of being bullied. Impacts of bullying and harassment on mental health. Bullying and harassment in the workplace is related to worker well-being, job dissatisfaction, motivation to perform at one's best, and sense of belonging to one's current organization. Bullying and harassment may result in employees experiencing stress and related health problems, including anxiety, panic attacks, and clinical depression. The impact of workplace bullying on perceived job stressors and psychological distress is particularly notable for women and persons of color. Bullying and harassment experienced in the workplace by gender-diverse individuals can result in stress, depression, and other mental health issues. Targets of harassment can also experience withdrawal from the organization. In a 2018 Statistics Canada study, 47% of men and 34% of women who had been harassed by a supervisor or manager had a weak sense of belonging to their current organization, compared with 16% of both women and men who said they had not been harassed at work in the past year. Promising practices for managers and organizations to address bullying and harassment. There are a number of promising practices managers and workplaces can adopt to help address bullying and harassment, and the negative effects they have on the targets, coworkers, and the organization. They can 1. Understand and act in accordance with existing legislation. Employers have a legal duty to protect employees from risks at work, including bullying and harassment, both of which contravene labor standards in Canada. While only some Canadian jurisdictions have occupational health and safety (OHS) legislation that specifies bullying, almost all jurisdictions have legislation pertaining to workplace violence and/or harassment. Federal and provincial human rights laws prohibit harassment related to race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, and other categorizations. These laws may apply to bullying. The Canada Labour Code establishes an employee's right to employment free of harassment and requires employers to take positive action to prevent harassment and sexual violence in the workplace. Bill C-65. 2. Establish policies and training programs to recognize, prevent, and reduce bullying and harassment. Managers can adopt, adapt, and strengthen anti-harassment and anti-bullying policies. An excellent example is from the Canadian Human Rights Commission's Workplace Anti-Harassment Policy. Managers can adopt, adapt, and strengthen anti-harassment and anti-bullying training programs, including for managers themselves, enabling them and others to recognize and respond to issues before they escalate. For example, the Cultural Human Resources Council's workshops on maintaining respectful workplaces for employers and workers provides helpful training. Managers can make use of existing anti-harassment and bullying strategies and resources. It's time. Canada's strategy to prevent and address gender-based violence takes a whole-of-government approach to prevent workplace harassment. It is important to note that sexual harassment and assault policies should be developed separately from general workplace employee conduct and harassment policy. Each policy needs different expertise and approaches to implementation. A video by the Ontario Federation of Labour called Climb the Hill presents stories of women who have experienced workplace sexual harassment and offers strategies to reduce it. 3. Join broader anti-bullying and anti-harassment campaigns and programs. An excellent example is the province-wide campaign in Nova Scotia working toward bully-free workplaces by the Nova Scotia Government and General Employees Union, NSGEU. The COVID-19 pandemic's social and physical distancing measures have meant that work is now being conducted from home for many employees. One might assume that this has eliminated bullying and harassment, but some early evidence suggests that it may persist and even increase in an online environment. Online meetings and communications have become a venue for virtual and visual incivility and inappropriate and disrespectful comments and sexual advances, even if experienced virtually. Signs of bullying and harassment include employees being excluded from meetings or having their input being passed over in online platforms. Complaints of gender harassment and racial intimidation are still evident. Frontline workers in healthcare and other essential services, who tend to be women, face a greater risk of workplace bullying, harassment, and violence. This has been particularly notable of patients, customers, and clients who contravene social distancing and masking policies. People of Asian descent or those who come from areas or workplaces highly affected by COVID-19 are more likely to be targets of unfair treatment by coworkers. It is important to note that even in this challenging environment, human rights legislation and occupational health and safety legislation require employers to ensure a workplace that is free of harassment and bullying. Now, let's take a look at one person's experience with bullying and harassment at work.
My name is Gasira. I work as an administrative assistant in a small government service department. I used to love my work. It was always interesting and there were a lot of different works to do. But the best thing is that I liked my colleagues and we all got on well together at work. Now I'm not feeling like I like my job anymore. I am thinking about moving to a different unit or quitting, and this is why. It's the way my manager treats me. My manager is a white man in his late 50s. I'm saying white because he constantly points out to me that I am black. Even though there has never been a problem with me getting my work done, he constantly makes more and more demands. Lately, he has started criticizing my work out loud in front of all my coworkers. One day he said, "You're so slow, so typical of all of you black women." This is starting to interfere with my work because I am just waiting for him to hurl the next bunch of insults. It makes me feel that I am useless and I am losing my self-confidence. And although I like to think I am strong, I don't feel good at all. I feel stressed out and sick to my stomach all the time. It's hard to shake these feelings off even when I am at home. I think because my colleagues hear him treat me like this, they feel uncomfortable too. But I wonder whether they also think I am the problem. I don't feel like a team member anymore. I have thought about writing to my HR many times, but I am afraid this will result in a blot on my HR file. Even worse, I've heard that it's always the victim that gets the bad outcome. I think the only way to solve my problem is to move or quit, but I can't afford to leave my job. My mental health and future prospects don't look very good.
As a manager, applying an SGBA lens to the issue of harassment and bullying in the workplace is an important step in better understanding the situation described in the vignette. It will help you to address it appropriately with the employee and ensure actions that are fair. Based on what you know about Gasira in the example given, a Black woman who works in a department which doesn't seem to apply anti-bullying and harassment policies or guidelines, and what you have learned about sex, gender, and racial identity, think about how her stress and mental health are impacted by the bullying and harassment she is experiencing at work. Consider how Gasira is treated and how her manager uses Gasira's personal identities as a basis to criticize her. In addition to sex, gender, how might other identities, for example race, age, and disability, factor into the experience of being bullied and harassed? How might the bullying and harassment that she is experiencing contribute to a workplace culture that doesn't curb bullying and harassment? How might this contribute to mental health issues among affected employees? Remember, the perpetrator may solicit support from colleagues who end up blaming the victim. What promising policies and program could be put into action to address the situation Gasira is experiencing? A final thought. As a manager, think about what the evidence shows in terms of the overall impact of sex and gender and other identity factors on bullying and harassment in the workplace, and in turn on the experience of stress and the mental health of a targeted employee and bystanders.
We hope that this episode makes it clear that applying an SGBA lens is essential for both employees and organizations to support employees' mental health. Other episodes in this series address other mental health in the workplace concerns from an explicit sex and gender lens. The full series can be found on this YouTube channel and links to the text-based toolkit at the Healthy Professional Worker website. This video and the series is derived from an SGBA policy partnership between the CIHR Institute of Gender and Health and Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada.